Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, was the head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Right now, in 2026, there is a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Picture this: a 6'3" Canadian snowboarder standing on the Olympic stage in 2002
on a U.S. Treasury sanctions list right next to war criminals and terrorists.
Ishmael Zambada Garcia, also known as El Mayo, has confessed to a lifetime of crime.
Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, was the head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of the most powerful drug organizations on the planet. But while other kingpins like El Chapo were flashing their wealth in cities, El Mencho was playing a completely different game that kept him free and alive for decades. The DEA estimated his personal fortune at over $500 million, possibly reaching $1 billion. But here's what really went down. This man chose to live in mountain hideouts while owning luxury resorts that Hollywood stars like Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts used to visit. We're talking about a dude who could buy anything but chose to own everything and live like he had nothing. To understand how the most wanted man in Mexico built and hid a billionaire lifestyle that made other drug lords look like amateurs, but this dude had military training from his time in the Mexican army, and he understood something other kingpins didn't. The flashier you are, the faster you fall. While guys like El Chapo were making headlines with their dramatic escapes and public displays of wealth, El Mencho was studying their mistakes and building something way more sophisticated. El Mencho watched as cartel after cartel got taken down because their leaders couldn't resist the spotlight. He saw how the Arellano Felix brothers in Tijuana got caught up in their own hype, how the Gulf cartel leaders kept getting arrested because they lived too publicly. This man was taking notes while everyone else was taking risks. While El Chapo was out here taking over restaurants, paying everyone's bills, and making a scene in Culiacan, El Mencho was quietly building something way bigger. We're talking about a cartel that the Mexican government estimated was worth $50 billion total. That's more than the GDP of countries like Jordan or Uruguay. No cap. But here's where it gets crazy. Instead of living like a typical drug lord, El Mencho was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He knew that DEA agent Kyle Morey wasn't lying when he said, "It's very difficult to drive a Lamborghini or Ferrari when you live in the mountains being chased." The man understood that survival meant sacrifice. While other kingpins were buying yachts and throwing parties, El Mencho was investing in infrastructure, building networks, and creating legitimate business fronts that would make his money untouchable. This is important because while other cartels were getting taken down left and right, El Mencho was building an empire that generated over $8 billion yearly just from cocaine, plus another $4.6 billion from methamphetamine. Gang was making more money than most Fortune 500 companies, but you'd never know it from looking at how he lived day to day. Now, to really understand this lifestyle, let me break down what this man actually owned versus how he actually lived. The contrast is absolutely wild, and it shows a level of self-control that most people with that kind of money could never maintain. According to Univision and DEA seizures, between 2015 and 2019, El Mencho had lost luxurious cabins built on a lagoon on Mexico's Pacific coast, more than 100 Japanese restaurants, shopping malls, newspapers, real estate, a tequila brand that tried to export to Europe, gold bars used to launder money, and even a ranch where there were exotic animals, including a Bengal tiger and endangered birds. But that's not even the crazy part. Let's talk about the Hotelito Desconocido, the Little Unknown Hotel. This was a 5-star eco-resort with 24 thatched roof bungalows in a UNESCO bird paradise. Sandra Bullock, Julia Roberts, and Blake Lively had all stayed there. In August 2015, the Mexican government seized it after American officials declared it a cartel front. Imagine that. Hollywood A-listers were unknowingly vacationing at a drug lord's resort, probably posting Instagram photos from a property that was being used to launder drug money. The irony is insane. According to sources, his ranches were something else entirely. The Rancho El Palmar was the most luxurious one, spanning between 20 and 50 hectares with kiosks, residences, parking for several vehicles, stables, and swimming pools. This wasn't just a house. This was a compound that could house an army. Then there was Rancho La Esperanza in Tonalá, owned by his father-in-law, José Luis Gutiérrez Valencia, known as Don Chelo. This was one of the most valuable properties the Attorney General's office ever secured. And it showed how El Mencho used family connections to spread his assets around and make them harder to trace. Here's where it gets real. At Rancho La Esperanza, they found a Bengal tiger, a Harris hawk, a yellow-breasted toucan, 2 other buteos called crested caracaras, and 3 green macaws. This man was collecting exotic animals like Pokemon cards for real. But these weren't just pets. They were status symbols that he kept private, away from public view. The Bengal tiger alone probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime, and required special permits, veterinary care, and facilities. But El Mencho wasn't showing it off on social media or bringing guests to see it. He was keeping these incredible assets completely secret, which shows the level of discipline this man had. Fast forward to the weapons they found. 6 9mm pistols, 2 of them gold-plated. One had the image of San Judas Tadeo. Another had precious stones embedded with a skull and Ferrari logo. These weren't just weapons. They were works of art that probably cost more than luxury cars. They also seized 2 rocket launchers, including one identical to the model the CJNG used in 2015 to shoot down a military helicopter. That's some next-level gangsta shit right there. Having weapons that can take down aircraft while living in mountain hideouts where aircraft would be your biggest threat. But here's what's really wild. While he owned all this luxury, El Mencho was also building legitimate business empires. Over 100 Japanese restaurants across Mexico, all operating as normal businesses while secretly moving money for the cartel. Customers were eating sushi and paying for meals, never knowing they were contributing to a billion-dollar drug operation. The shopping malls he owned were full of regular families doing their weekend shopping, completely unaware that their rent payments were going to one of the most wanted men in the world. The newspapers he controlled were reporting on cartel violence while being owned by a cartel leader. The level of irony is off the charts. But here's the plot twist that'll blow your mind. Despite owning all this luxury, El Mencho lived nothing like the typical billionaire drug lord. While he owned gold bars for money laundering, luxury cabins on lagoons, and over 100 Japanese restaurants as fronts, this man chose to live in the mountains like a rancher who was constantly on the run. According to DEA agent Kyle Morey, who spent years hunting him, he hides in mountainous areas in Jalisco, Michoacan, and Colima. We believe he is no longer in the cities. This wasn't just about staying low-key. This was a complete lifestyle philosophy that went against everything we thought we knew about drug lord behavior. Let me break down the difference between El Mencho and El Chapo for you, because it shows 2 completely different approaches to having unlimited money. Agent Morey explained it perfectly. You have heard stories of El Chapo entering a restaurant, taking away all the cell phones of those dining, paying everyone's bills, and disappearing in Culiacan. El Mencho won't do that. He doesn't mind living in the mountains like a rancher. That complicates his capture. Where was El Chapo captured? Always in cities. Think about that for a second. El Chapo, with all his money and power, couldn't resist the temptation to live in cities, to show off, to make grand gestures that fed his ego. But El Mencho had the same resources and chose to sleep in mountain caves and rural compounds, eating simple meals and wearing basic clothes. So while El Mencho owned properties in towns of Villa Purificación in Jalisco, located in the delegations La Eca, Lo Arado, and Villavieja. He wasn't living it up in penthouses or throwing parties. These were narco ranches and rural properties used for relaxing and collecting exotic animals, luxury cars, jewelry, and other rare items. But they served as shelters and strategic hideouts, not party spots. The psychological discipline this required is incredible. Imagine having access to the finest restaurants in the world, but choosing to eat beans and rice in a mountain cabin. Having enough money to buy any car ever made but driving beat-up trucks through rural terrain. Owning luxury resorts, but sleeping on basic beds in hidden compounds. The man had military discipline that other drug lords completely lacked. According to intelligence reports, another factor favoring the drug trafficker is that he does not use drugs. He's in good health and excellent physical condition due to his military discipline. While other kingpins were getting high on their own supply, partying with their wealth, El Mencho was staying sharp, focused, and physically fit. This is crucial because drug lords who use their own products make terrible decisions. They get paranoid, they get sloppy, they start trusting the wrong people. But El Mencho treated his body like a temple and his mind like a weapon, which gave him advantages that money alone couldn't buy. His security setup was on another level too. Authorities suspected his inner circle was made up of mercenaries with former military training, not just street thugs with guns, but professional soldiers who understood tactics, strategy, and discipline. His second security circle was much larger and served as a rear guard, creating multiple layers of protection. He usually traveled across mountains and rural terrains because it provided multiple escape routes if security forces tried to encircle him. While other drug lords were getting trapped in cities with limited exit strategies, El Mencho always had options: mountains, forests, rural roads, terrain that favored someone who knew how to live rough and move fast. But the story doesn't end there. Because despite all this careful planning and incredible self-discipline, the lifestyle he chose to live ultimately led to his downfall. The very isolation that protected him for so long also made him vulnerable in ways he probably never anticipated. On February 22nd, 2026, in Tapalpa, Jalisco, El Mencho's careful game of hide-and-seek finally came to an end. But the way they caught him shows just how different his lifestyle really was from other drug lords, and how even the smartest strategies can have fatal flaws. The investigation revealed that military investigators identified and began following a trusted associate of one of El Mencho's romantic partners. This shows that even living in isolation, the man still had human needs and emotional connections that created vulnerabilities. This individual escorted the woman to Tapalpa on Friday for a meeting with the drug lord. The woman left after spending the night with El Mencho, but by then, it was too late. The military had tracked her movements, identified the location, and were closing in. It's almost poetic that a man who avoided capture for decades by avoiding human contact was finally caught because he couldn't completely cut himself off from human relationships. When the final confrontation went down, Oseguera Cervantes attempted to take cover in a wooded area dotted with cabins on the outskirts of Tapalpa. Even in his final moments, he was in the mountains, in rural terrain, living exactly the way he had chosen for years. He died as he lived, in the wilderness, away from cities, true to his survival philosophy until the very end. But let's talk about what the authorities had been seizing throughout his reign, because the scope of his wealth was absolutely insane. Beyond the exotic animals and gold-plated weapons, they found shopping malls where regular families shopped for groceries, newspapers that regular people read for local news, and real estate companies that helped regular people buy homes. The tequila brand that was trying to export to Europe shows how sophisticated his money laundering operations were. This wasn't just about moving cash. This was about building legitimate international businesses that could generate clean money for decades. Imagine walking into a liquor store in Paris and buying a bottle of tequila, not knowing you were contributing to a Mexican cartel's profits. The Japanese restaurants alone, over 100 of them, were being used as fronts across Mexico. Think about the logistics of that operation. Each restaurant needed staff, suppliers, permits, health inspections, tax filings. Each one was a fully functioning business that served real customers real food while secretly moving millions of dollars in drug money. Imagine being a sushi chef working at one of these places, making California rolls and tempura, completely unaware that your paycheck was coming from one of the most dangerous men in the world. The level of compartmentalization required to run this operation is mind-blowing. In court proceedings and DEA reports, they documented armored vehicles that could withstand military-grade weapons, fleets of SUVs equipped with communication systems and escape routes planned down to the minute, and vehicles specifically designed for mountain terrain that could navigate roads most people didn't even know existed. While he didn't have the Lamborghinis and Ferraris that other drug lords flaunted on social media, his vehicle collection was built for survival, not showing off. These were machines designed for one purpose, keeping him alive and free. Every vehicle was chosen for its ability to navigate specific terrain, carry specific equipment, or blend in with specific environments. The gold bars they found weren't just wealth storage. They were portable assets that could be moved quickly and converted to cash in any country. While other drug lords kept their money in banks that could be frozen or seized, El Mencho kept his wealth in forms that could disappear as quickly as he could. Meanwhile, the CJNG continued operating even after his death, showing just how well organized his empire was. The cartel he built was generating billions annually and had operations worldwide, but El Mencho himself chose to live like he was constantly on the run, because he was. The organization was bigger than any one person, which was probably part of his strategy from the beginning. This whole story changed how we think about drug lord lifestyles forever, and it reveals something profound about human nature, power, and the price of staying on top in the most dangerous game in the world. El Mencho's legacy isn't just about the money he made or the empire he built. It's about proving that sometimes the smartest move is to live below your means, even when you're worth more than most celebrities. But it's also about showing the psychological cost of that choice and what it means to have everything but enjoy nothing. Think about the mental strength required to own a 5-star resort where Hollywood stars vacation but never stay there yourself. To have exotic animals worth millions, but only see them during brief, secretive visits. To control newspapers and shopping malls, but never be able to walk through them openly. That's a level of self-denial that most people couldn't maintain for a week, let alone decades. The law enforcement community learned that flashy doesn't always mean powerful, and that their traditional methods of tracking drug lords through their spending habits were completely useless against someone like El Mencho. While they were monitoring luxury car dealerships and high-end real estate transactions, he was building a $50 billion empire from mountain hideouts, using legitimate businesses as fronts. This forced law enforcement to completely rethink their approach. They had to start looking at legitimate businesses, following paper trails through legal companies, and understanding that the most dangerous criminals might be the ones living like they're broke. The investigation techniques developed to catch El Mencho are probably still being used today to track other sophisticated criminal organizations. For real, think about this. The man owned a resort where Hollywood stars vacationed, had enough exotic animals to start a private zoo, and possessed gold bars worth more than most people's houses. But he chose to sleep in mountain cabins and travel rural terrain. That's some next-level strategic thinking, but it's also a kind of prison that he built for himself. The psychological profile of El Mencho reveals something fascinating about power and sacrifice. Most people dream of having unlimited money so they can enjoy unlimited freedom. But El Mencho had unlimited money and chose to live with almost no freedom at all. He was probably one of the most restricted people on the planet, despite being one of the wealthiest. Today, the properties he owned tell different stories. The Hotelito Desconocido, where Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts once stayed, serves as a reminder of how drug money can infiltrate legitimate businesses without anyone knowing. It's probably still operating as a resort, but now everyone knows its history. Imagine staying there today, knowing that your luxury vacation spot was once owned by one of the most wanted men in the world. The Japanese restaurants are probably still serving sushi to families who have no idea about their connection to the CJNG. The shopping malls are still full of people buying clothes and electronics, completely unaware of the building's criminal history. The newspapers might still be reporting local news, but now everyone knows who used to control the narrative. The CJNG's estimated $50 billion in total holdings, encompassing cash, properties, and investments worldwide, shows the scale of what one man built while living like he was broke. His annual revenue streams of over $8 billion from cocaine and $4.6 billion from methamphetamine prove that you don't need to live flashy to run a massive operation, but they also show the incredible wealth that he never got to truly enjoy. But here's the real lesson from El Mencho's billionaire lifestyle. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you'd never suspect, and sometimes having everything means enjoying nothing. While other drug lords were getting caught because they couldn't resist the spotlight, El Mencho understood that true power comes from staying invisible, but that invisibility comes with a price that most people wouldn't be willing to pay. His military discipline, his refusal to use drugs, his excellent physical condition, and his choice to live in the mountains rather than cities all contributed to building one of the most successful criminal enterprises in history. But they also contributed to a life of constant isolation, paranoia, and sacrifice that would drive most people insane. The man had access to luxury that most billionaires could only dream of, but he chose survival over status symbols, strategy over satisfaction, and longevity over luxury. In the end, it kept him free for decades longer than his flashier competitors, but it also meant he never got to truly enjoy the fruits of his empire. That's the wild part about this whole story. El Mencho proved that you can have everything and choose to live like you have nothing. And sometimes that's exactly what keeps you on top. But it also proves that being on top in the drug game means living in a way that most people would consider worse than being broke. His lifestyle wasn't about the money he spent, but about the money he made, while everyone else was looking in the wrong places. He built an empire by sacrificing everything that makes wealth enjoyable: freedom, security, relationships, and peace of mind. The question is whether that trade-off was worth it, and whether anyone can truly win a game where the price of victory is never being able to enjoy it. This man redefined what it means to live like a billionaire in the drug game. While others were fronting with their wealth, El Mencho was building an empire that outlasted most of his flashier competitors. That's some real gangsta shit right there. Having $1 billion and choosing to live like a rancher because you know that's what keeps you alive and free. But it's also a cautionary tale about the cost of that choice. El Mencho may have stayed free longer than other drug lords, but he also lived a life that was probably lonelier, more stressful, and more restrictive than most people in prison. He had all the money in the world but couldn't spend it on the things that make life worth living: experiences, relationships, and peace of mind. The legacy of El Mencho isn't just about the CJNG or the billions in drug money. It's about showing that sometimes the smartest move is the one nobody expects, but also that every choice has consequences, even the smart ones. And for years, that strategy worked better than any Lamborghini or gold chain ever could. But it also cost him everything that makes having money worthwhile in the first place. Right now, in 2026, there is a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly $1 billion, who cannot step outside his own front door without a full military-style security detail surrounding him. He can't post on social media anymore, can't pull up to a restaurant, can't fly commercial, can't drive through his own city without worrying that the next vehicle behind him is either a rival cartel or a Mexican Special Forces unit with orders to bring him in dead or alive. And yet, this man is still living better than 99.9% of people on this planet. His name is Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, known to the world as El Chapito, the last free son of El Chapo. And in 2026, the United States government is offering $10 million just for information about where he sleeps at night. Stay with us until the end of this video, because what we uncovered about how this man actually lives in 2026, the cars, the safe houses, the people protecting him, the tunnels he uses to disappear, this is a level of cartel luxury that most people have never seen documented in one place. And by the end, you're going to understand something that nobody talks about: how the most wanted man in Mexico is somehow still living like a king. Ivan Archivaldo was born into something most cartel kids could only dream about. His father wasn't just any trafficker. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was, at his peak, the most powerful drug lord in the history of the Western Hemisphere, running a multi-billion-dollar operation that moved cocaine, heroin, and eventually fentanyl across the U.S. border like a corporation moves inventory. But here's what really went down with the sons. El Chapo had dozens of kids from multiple women. Most of them were kept far from the business. But the two sons from his first wife, Ivan Archivaldo, and his brother Jesus Alfredo, known as Alfredillo, those two were different. Those were the ones El Chapo groomed. Those were the ones he brought into meetings, introduced to plaza bosses, trusted with operations while he was on the run. So when El Chapo got extradited to the United States in 2017 and was handed a life sentence in 2019, the empire didn't collapse. It transferred, and Ivan Archivaldo stepped into a role that most men would be terrified to hold. Now it's 2026. Two of his half-brothers, Ovidio and Joaquin, are already in U.S. custody cutting deals. His brother Alfredillo is underground, and Ivan is the last one standing, still running the Sinaloa cartel's most powerful faction, still somewhere in Mexico, and still somehow living like an untouchable. To understand how that's even possible, and what that life actually looks like, we gotta go back to where it all started. Let's rewind. The year is 2003. Ivan Archivaldo is barely 20 years old, and already the Sinaloa cartel is the most dominant drug trafficking organization in Mexico. His father controls smuggling routes from the Pacific coast all the way through the southwest border of the United States. Tunnels, planes, submarines. El Chapo built infrastructure that made other cartels look amateur. And Ivan grew up inside all of it. Here's where this story is different from every other cartel biography you've watched. El Chapo himself grew up dirt poor, a campesino from the mountains of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, surviving on nothing. That hunger is what made him dangerous. But Ivan never knew what hunger felt like. He was born into the money, born into the compound life, the private schools, the luxury that his father's operation funded from day one. Journalists who covered the Sinaloa cartel during that era described the Guzman sons as a different breed. Not street soldiers who worked their way up, but heirs who were handed the keys. And early on, a lot of people in the cartel dismissed them. Spoiled kids, they said. Rich boys who would fold under pressure. They were wrong. In February 2005, Ivan got arrested in Guadalajara on money laundering charges. He was in his early 20s, sitting in a vehicle with associates when local police pulled them over. They found evidence tying him to the organization. The government hit him with a case, sent him to La Palma, one of Mexico's most secure federal prisons, and it looked like El Chapo's heir was done before he even got started. But this is where you start to understand how the Guzman family operates. El Chapo didn't just have money. He had influence inside every institution in Mexico that mattered. According to investigative journalist Anabel Hernandez, when Ivan wrote to his father from prison asking for warmer clothes to deal with the cold, El Chapo asked the prison guards for help smuggling in the clothes. The guards, who were already on the cartel payroll, raised their fee to $500,000 just for that one favor. $500,000 to smuggle in clothes for one request. That tells you everything about what kind of money we're talking about. By 2008, Ivan successfully appealed his conviction. A federal judge ruled there was insufficient proof his money came from drug trafficking, other than the fact that his father was the world's most wanted drug trafficker. The judge and another official were later suspended on suspicion of irregularities in their rulings. Ivan walked out a free man, and from that point forward, he never looked back. By the time the 2010s rolled around, Ivan Archivaldo wasn't just a cartel member. He was becoming something completely new in the narco world. A public figure. A brand. This man was posting on Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Twitter while simultaneously running one of the most violent criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. Security analysts were baffled. Raul Benitez, a Mexican security specialist, told the Associated Press directly, "A serious narco doesn't do that." But Ivan didn't care, because Ivan Archivaldo wasn't his father. El Chapo operated in total secrecy for decades. Ivan operated in public, blurred faces in his photos, and posted anyway. He had over 220,000 Instagram followers on an account widely attributed to him, and every post was basically a flex showcase. Exotic cars, private planes, alcohol. We're talking Moet Chandon, top shelf everything. Women, beach vacations, boxing matches in Las Vegas, gambling trips. This was the narco influencer era, and Ivan was one of the originals. Now here's what's important to understand about that choice. In Mexican narco culture, especially in Sinaloa, status is currency. The corridos written about you, the lifestyle people see you living. That's part of how you maintain control. It's intimidation through aspiration. When the people under you see that kind of life, that kind of wealth, they're more loyal. When rivals see it, they know what they're up against. Ivan was broadcasting power. Then things got serious in a different way. In August 2016, Ivan and his brother Alfredillo were kidnapped in broad daylight by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. The two most important sons of El Chapo were snatched from La Leche restaurant, an upscale tourist spot in Puerto Vallarta with people around them. This wasn't some dark alley. This was a luxury restaurant in a tourist zone. The CJNG held them for days. The entire Sinaloa cartel mobilized. Both brothers were eventually released. The terms were never made public, but the message was clear. The Chapitos had power, but they also had targets on their backs for life. Then came the event that defined who Ivan Archivaldo truly was. October 17, 2019, Culiacan. Mexican security forces moved on Ovidio Guzman Lopez, one of Ivan's half-brothers, and briefly arrested him in the city. What happened next was unlike anything seen in modern Mexican history. Within hours, hundreds of armed cartel gunmen flooded the streets of Culiacan in armored vehicles equipped with rocket launchers. Military families in a housing complex were taken hostage. Soldiers were captured. The entire city turned into a war zone. The Mexican government, under then-President López Obrador, made the decision to release Ovidio rather than risk more civilian casualties. The cartel had forced a government to stand down. And Ivan Archivaldo was one of the men who orchestrated that response. That wasn't just drug trafficking. That was military-level power projection. From that point on, The United States government's interest in the Chapitos moved from investigation to full-scale pursuit. In 2023, a grand jury in the Northern District of Illinois handed down a massive indictment. Ivan charged with conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, running a continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, and involvement in murders. The U.S. State Department put a $5 million reward on his head. That number later jumped to $10 million. But Ivan was still free, still in Sinaloa, still running operations. So now we get to the part of this video that nobody has put together in one place. What does Ivan Arquivaldo's life actually look like in 2026? Not what it used to look like. Not the Instagram posts from 2018. What does it look like right now, when he is the most wanted man still breathing free air in Mexico? Because here's the thing, the lifestyle didn't disappear. It evolved. It went underground. And in some ways, it got more extreme. First, you have to understand how Ivan moves. He doesn't stay in one place. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal in May 2025, Mexican Special Forces raided a safe house in Culiacan, where they found evidence of Ivan's recent presence. They were close. But he was already gone, reportedly through an underground tunnel connected to the property. Tunnels. Just like his father. El Chapo's most famous escapes were through tunnels. A mile-long tunnel from his prison cell in 2015, complete with a motorcycle on tracks. And now in 2026, his son is using the same playbook just to survive day-to-day life in his own city. The properties Ivan operates out of are reportedly built with escape infrastructure, multiple exit routes, underground passages connecting to neighboring buildings, to streets, to drainage systems. This isn't a coincidence. This is a design philosophy. The Guzman family learned that staying in one place gets you caught. Movement is survival. So the luxury lifestyle in 2026 is distributed across multiple locations. There's no single mansion where Ivan parks himself. Instead, you're talking about a rotating circuit of compounds. Some in the urban sprawl of Culiacan, others in the mountains of Sinaloa, where cartel infrastructure has existed for decades. Some sources describe properties in remote areas where only trusted people know the coordinates, surrounded by lookouts and armed security positioned at every access point. Let's talk about the fleet, because this is where the Chapito lifestyle has always been most visible. For real, Ivan's car collection was documented across multiple social media platforms in its prime years. We're talking supercars, armored SUVs, custom trucks. Think Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche, but also the narco-custom side of things. In Sinaloa cartel culture, vehicles often get custom bulletproof modifications, lifted trucks with reinforced bodies, and interiors that look like they belong in a penthouse. Gold and chrome trim, custom leather, entertainment systems, refrigerators, weapons storage compartments hidden in the chassis. But in 2026, those vehicles don't get posted online anymore. The flex era is over, at least publicly. Now the same cars exist, but they're moved strategically. Ivan doesn't take the same route twice. The convoy around him isn't just for show, it's operational. Multiple vehicles, counter-surveillance teams, decoy vehicles running different routes simultaneously. When he moves, it looks like a military operation. Lead vehicle sweeps the road. Follow vehicles monitor for tails. Ivan himself could be in any one of them, or none of them. The whole system is designed so that even someone watching from a distance can't be certain which vehicle to target. Think about what that means in practical terms. You cannot just own a Ferrari in 2026 and drive it through Culiacan. When you are Ivan Arquivaldo, the car exists. Probably multiple Ferraris exist, but they stay behind compound walls until the conditions are right, until the intelligence says the route is clean, until the security team has swept every kilometer. That is not freedom. That is the most expensive captivity in the world, and his chief financial operator has already been extradited to the United States. The money manager who handled the cash flows for Ivan's side of the cartel, federal agents got to him first, which means the financial infrastructure around Ivan has had to adapt, restructure, and go deeper underground. New intermediaries, new channels, new trusted people who may or may not actually be trustworthy. Every restructuring creates new vulnerabilities, and Ivan knows it. This is something most people don't talk about when they describe cartel luxury. The actual human cost of keeping a man like Ivan alive. According to a narco corrido called El Tiempo es Caro, his top security figure's role included direct personal protection of Ivan Archivaldo 24 hours a day. We're talking a full private army, not 3 guys with pistols. A structured military hierarchy with radio communications, intelligence gathering, and real-time threat assessment. The same operation that mobilized hundreds of gunmen across Culiacan in 2019 can, in theory, be activated for Ivan's personal protection at any moment. In 2026, with the cartel in an internal war, the Chapitos faction against the Mayos faction that erupted in late 2024, that security operation is running hot. The civil war inside Sinaloa, following the arrest of El Mayo Zambada and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, created a situation where Ivan cannot trust everyone around him. Former allies are now potential informants. Rivals within the same organization want him gone. Every person who knows his location is a potential $10 million payday. So you have this situation where a man with more personal wealth than most CEOs of Fortune 500 companies has to treat every person in his circle as a potential threat. That's not freedom. That's a very expensive prison without walls. Now let's be real. Even in 2026, even as a fugitive, Ivan Archivaldo is not living a miserable life. The parties didn't stop. They just moved. In cartel culture, celebrations happen in controlled environments. A private ranch outside the city, a compound with its own generator, its own catering, its own entertainment, musicians who are paid to perform and then driven home blindfolded, so they don't know where they were. Narco corrido artists, banda groups, regional performers. The biggest names in Mexican regional music have performed at private cartel events, sometimes willingly, sometimes because the invitation is more of a demand than a request. According to reporting from Latin Times in 2025, influencers and social media figures were being targeted and killed after being accused of having financial ties to Los Chapitos. That's the environment Ivan moves in. The people around him, even entertainers, even YouTube creators, can become targets in the internal war. So in 2026, the parties are tighter, the guest lists shorter, and the secrecy around them is absolute. But they still happen. The alcohol is still premium. The food is still 5-star. The service is still immaculate. Because this is a man who has never known anything else. No discussion of Ivan Archivaldo's lifestyle is complete without the weapons culture. This isn't just tools of the trade. In narco culture, weaponry is jewelry. It's status. Custom gold-plated AR-15s, engraved pistols with diamond inlays, AK-47s with custom woodwork. These are pieces that cost more than most people's cars, and they're worn like accessories. In the social media posts widely attributed to the Chapitos from the peak years, the weaponry was displayed right alongside the cars and the cash. This wasn't hiding anything. It was celebrating it. In 2026, those custom weapons exist in the same quantities, probably more. They're just not on the internet anymore. U.S. authorities accused Ivan and his brothers of running a drug trafficking operation that reaped hundreds of millions of dollars in profits by flooding the United States with fentanyl. Hundreds of millions. and that's what the prosecutors could document. The actual number, the full scope of what flows through the Sinaloa cartel's operations at the Chapitos level, is something the DEA itself acknowledges they can only estimate. The fentanyl operation alone is a machine. Pills pressed in clandestine laboratories in Culiacan, shipped across the border in everything from hollowed-out produce shipments to legitimate commercial freight, distributed through networks that stretch from Southern California to Chicago to New York. 1 kilogram of fentanyl can produce roughly 1 million counterfeit pills. 1 million pills at street value. Multiply that by the scale the Chapitos operate at. Shipments measured in the hundreds of kilograms, sometimes thousands. And you start to understand why the money is almost impossible to spend fast enough. And the fentanyl isn't even the only product. Cocaine from Colombia, methamphetamine from labs spread across Sinaloa State, heroin from the poppy fields that El Chapo first established decades ago. The Sinaloa cartel under the Chapitos is a full-service operation, and Ivan's faction controls some of the most profitable corridors. In 2026, with two brothers cooperating with U.S. prosecutors and potentially giving up financial intelligence, Ivan's money has to be moving through even more complex channels. Shell companies, real estate, businesses that look legitimate on paper, money laundering at a scale that makes most financial crimes look like shoplifting. The U.S. Treasury has sanctioned him, which means any U.S. person or institution doing business with him, knowingly or not, faces legal consequences. International banks are on alert, so the cash has to move through informal systems, through trusted intermediaries, through economies that don't have tight enough oversight to stop it. That money is still flowing, and it's still funding a lifestyle that most people can't even imagine. Here's where the walls start closing in, and the story of Ivan's 2026 lifestyle can't be told without understanding how much pressure is surrounding it right now. In July 2025, his half-brother Ovidio Guzman Lopez stood in the Dirksen Federal Building in Chicago and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of drug distribution and 2 counts of participation in a continuing criminal enterprise. He's now cooperating with the U.S. government, trying to reduce a potential life sentence by giving up information about the cartel's operations. Think about what that means for Ivan. Ovidio was inside the operation. He knows routes, contacts, financial structures, safe house locations, the names of corrupt officials on the payroll. Everything Ovidio gives up is potentially a bullet pointed directly at Ivan. And then there's Joaquin Guzman Lopez, the half-brother who was arrested in 2024 after allegedly helping orchestrate the betrayal of El Mayo Zambada, luring him onto a plane that landed in the United States. Joaquin is also in U.S. custody, also potentially cooperating. So Ivan Archivaldo, right now in 2026, is operating with the knowledge that 2 of his brothers are in rooms somewhere in the American federal prison system talking to prosecutors. That's not paranoia. That's the actual reality of his situation. In June 2025, the U.S. Treasury Department announced fresh sanctions specifically targeting Ivan and Jesus Alfredo. New designations, new financial restrictions, new rewards. The message from Washington was clear. These 2 men are the priority targets now that the others are in custody. And on the ground in Mexico, the internal cartel war that erupted in 2024 between Los Chapitos and Los Mayos turned Culiacan into a city on edge. Kidnappings, disappearances, murders, not just of cartel figures, but of civilians caught in the crossfire. The Mexican Secretary of Security confirmed steady pressure on both factions, with arrests of key lieutenants and security chiefs. In February 2025, Ivan's head of security, a man known as El Dos Cientos, his alias meaning 200, was captured by Mexican forces. his inner circle was shrinking. And then there's the tunnel story. Mexican authorities denied the Wall Street Journal's reporting that Ivan escaped through a tunnel in early 2025. But the Journal stood by its reporting. Whether you believe the official denial or the investigative journalists, the story itself tells you how close the net is getting. Forces were inside the same building. Evidence of his presence was found. He was close enough to touch. On the streets of Culiacan in 2026, everyone knows who Ivan is, but nobody talks. The culture of silence, what the Italians call omertà, and what in Sinaloa is just understood as the only way to stay alive, keeps the information contained. Informants get killed. Families of informants get threatened. The $10 million reward from the US government is real, but in a city where the cartel controls large parts of daily life, taking that money means signing your own death warrant. So where does this leave us in 2026? Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar is 42 years old, give or take, because even his birth date has conflicting records in official US government documents. He has spent his entire adult life inside the most violent, most lucrative, and most hunted criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. He watched his father get extradited to a supermax prison in Colorado and sentenced to life. He watched 3 of his brothers get captured one by one. He survived a kidnapping by a rival cartel. He survived the Battle of Culiacan. He survived raids, indictments, sanctions, and a $10 million bounty on his existence. And yet in 2026, he is still free. Still the co-leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Still commanding an operation that moves fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin across the United States border at a volume that the DEA describes as a national emergency. His lifestyle in 2026 is the lifestyle of a man who understands something deeply, that every luxury comes with a price, and the price he pays is permanent vigilance. He lives in mansions, but he can never be comfortable in them for too long. He eats the best food, but the cook could be working for someone else. He commands an army, but armies can turn. He has more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But his chief money man is sitting in a US federal court explaining where every dollar went. This is the paradox of the billionaire fugitive. The things that made him powerful, the wealth, the people around him, the lifestyle, are the same things that make him findable. Every compound costs money. Every trusted person knows his face. Every vehicle leaves a trail. But here's what really changed in 2026, and this is the part that matters. Ivan Archivaldo no longer posts on social media. The man who was once described by a security analyst as spending all his time on Facebook and WhatsApp, a man whose Instagram was a rolling documentary of the narco-billionaire life, has gone completely dark online. No public accounts, no blurred face photos, no party videos, no cars, no planes, no bottles. Because the flex era is over. El Chapo spent decades surviving by staying invisible, and Ivan spent his prime years doing the opposite, living publicly, loudly, ostentatiously, like the rules didn't apply to him. And maybe they didn't for a while, but in 2026, with 2 brothers cooperating in US custody, with his security chief arrested, with Mexican special forces raiding his safe houses, with a US Treasury designation and a DEA top priority target label on his back, the Instagram lifestyle is a liability now. The irony is thick. The son who was too flashy, too public, too much of a show-off for the old guard of the cartel, is now living in more secrecy than El Chapo ever did. He has become the thing his father always was, a ghost. Somewhere in Sinaloa, somewhere in the mountains, moving through tunnels his father would have recognized. The difference is that El Chapo built his empire from nothing and operated in shadows by choice. Ivan inherited an empire and is now hiding in shadows by necessity. Will he be the last Chapito standing, or just the last one captured? Right now in 2026, nobody outside his inner circle knows the answer to that question. And $10 million says a lot of people are trying to find out. Picture this: a 6'3" Canadian snowboarder standing on the Olympic stage in 2002, representing his country with pride. Fast forward 23 years, and that same man is now on the FBI Most Wanted list, with a $15 million bounty on his head, accused of running a billion-dollar drug empire that moved 60 metric tons of cocaine a year. But here's the thing that will blow your mind. Ryan Wedding's fall was not the result of some elaborate FBI sting or a cartel betrayal. No, this modern-day Pablo Escobar got too comfortable, too cocky, and made one fatal mistake that led to his capture just days ago in Mexico City. Stay until the end, because I am about to break down exactly how an Olympic athlete transformed into one of the world's most dangerous drug kingpins, and how his own arrogance became his ultimate undoing. Ryan James Wedding was born in 1981 in Thunder Bay, Ontario, a city that gets more snow than most people see in a lifetime. His grandparents owned Mount Baldy Ski Resort, and his uncle was a director of the ski school. He was not a kid from the streets. Wedding came from a family of accomplished athletes and successful business owners. His father was a former competitive skier, and by the time Ryan could walk, his grandfather already had him on skis. The Wedding family was deeply embedded in Ontario's winter sports culture. They were not just participants, they were leaders in the community. Mount Baldy was not just a business, it was a family legacy built over decades. Ryan grew up surrounded by Olympic-level training facilities, professional coaching, and the kind of resources that most aspiring athletes could only dream of. At 12 years old, when his family moved to Coquitlam, British Columbia, near Vancouver, Ryan discovered snowboarding. This kid was fearless. Bob Allison, a former professional skier who was assembling an elite Canadian snowboarding team, described young Ryan as having no fear whatsoever. While other kids would hold back because they were scared of falling, Ryan had none of that hesitation. In 2002, at just 20 years old, Ryan Wedding achieved what millions of athletes only dream of. He was chosen to represent Canada at the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, Utah. This was his moment. Years of training, sacrifice, and dedication had led to this. The pressure was immense. Canada had high expectations for their snowboarding team, especially after Ross Rabagliati's controversial but ultimately successful gold medal run in 1998. Ryan was seen as the next generation of Canadian snowboarding excellence. He had the technique, the fearlessness, and the competitive drive that coaches look for in Olympic champions. Ryan quickly realized that his Olympic dreams, while noble, were not going to fund the lifestyle he craved. A regular job would not cut it. Even a successful career in sports marketing or coaching would never generate the kind of money he wanted. He wanted flashy cars, expensive watches, luxury apartments. He wanted to live like a king, and he understood that traditional employment would never get him there. As a bouncer at Vancouver nightclubs, Ryan started making friends with the very people he was supposed to keep out: dealers, smugglers, and criminals with serious connections. His girlfriend at the time noticed the transformation from the quiet family type who did not care about status or appearance to a man wearing Prada shoes and Breitling watches. Vancouver's nightclub scene in the early 2000s was a powder keg waiting to explode. The city was on the brink of a gang war over marijuana territory, and violence was becoming commonplace. Random shootings erupted in clubs, and police began sweeping through bars, throwing out anyone who looked like a dealer. The writing was on the wall. Ryan Wedding had tasted the Olympic stage, but now he wanted something bigger, more profitable, and something that would give him the power and respect he felt he deserved. After dropping out of college with a $250,000 loan from his father, Ryan bought and flipped a house in Maple Ridge, using the profits to fund a luxurious apartment in Westwood Plateau with high ceilings, a pinball machine, and a racing seat gaming setup. His garage housed snowmobiles, a Ducati, and a BMW M5. This was a privileged lifestyle. But even with the house flipping profits, this lifestyle was way too expensive for a bouncer's salary. So Ryan turned to what he saw as the perfect business opportunity, one that was quiet, profitable, and completely illegal. His friend owned a property in Maple Ridge called 18 Carrot Farms, but instead of growing carrots, they were cultivating something much more valuable. According to a confidential informant, Ryan and his partner were running a massive operation with 8,000 marijuana plants spread across multiple buildings on the property. This was not some amateur hour operation. They had invested in professional-grade growing equipment, sophisticated irrigation systems, and high-intensity lighting that could maximize plant yield. The operation was designed to produce premium-quality marijuana that could command top dollar in both Canadian and American markets. The setup was clearly professional. Twice a month, Ryan would drive out to the facility, tend to the plants, and coordinate deliveries to suppliers across British Columbia. The operation was pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, maybe more. Conservative estimates put their monthly revenue at over $100,000, with profit margins that would make legitimate businesses jealous. Hundreds of thousands in revenue was plausible. But here is where Ryan made his first critical mistake. The operation was consuming 2,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per month, far more than any typical warehouse should use. In British Columbia, unusual electricity consumption patterns were red flags for law enforcement agencies specifically looking for grow operations. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police had developed sophisticated methods for identifying marijuana cultivation facilities. They would cross-reference electricity usage data with property records, looking for warehouses or residential properties consuming electricity at levels consistent with high-intensity growing lights. By summer 2006, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had taken notice of 18 Carrot Farms. They conducted surveillance, gathered intelligence, and prepared for a major raid. On the day of the operation, they found loaded guns in a locked safe, 6,800 cannabis plants in various stages of growth, and 86 pounds of dried marijuana with an estimated street value of $10 million. It was the largest grow operation ever uncovered in Maple Ridge, and it made headlines across British Columbia. But here's the crazy part. Even with all that evidence, police could not charge Ryan. They only had a confidential informant linking him to the site, and that was not enough to secure a conviction. Between 1997 and 2003, British Columbia law enforcement had investigated roughly 25,000 grow operations, but they could not keep up with the sheer volume. The priority had shifted from prosecution to shutting places down and moving on to the next case. They could not prosecute them all. Ryan Wedding had just dodged his first major bullet, but instead of taking it as a warning, he saw it as proof that he was untouchable. By fall 2007, Ryan was telling friends he was broke. He had lost roughly $500,000 on a shady real estate deal, and another $300,000 on a cocaine deal gone bad. But instead of walking away from the drug trade, he doubled down in the most dangerous way possible. That is when he befriended Hassan Shirini, a Persian Canadian known to police since 1997. Shirini was not just another street-level dealer. He was connected to sophisticated international networks that could move money and drugs across borders without detection. Shirini opened a new door for Ryan, the Hawala Network, a trust-based money transferring system dating back to the 8th century. This ancient system operates on trust and brokers called Hawaladars. A client hands cash and a fee to a broker, they agree on a code, and the broker relays that code to another broker where the recipient lives. Payment is made locally, and the actual funds are settled later between brokers, sometimes via internet transfers or physical couriers. Ryan approached Shirini about buying cocaine in California, saying he could front about $340,000, a massive sum that represented everything he had left after his previous losses. This was not just another drug deal. This was Ryan betting his entire future on one transaction. After a series of meetings that included two men tied to Russian organized crime, they agreed to try for 24 kilograms from a contact in Los Angeles. The plan was simple. If the first deal worked, they would establish a regular supply line and scale up operations dramatically. The Russian connection was crucial because it provided access to networks that had been moving drugs and money internationally for decades. These were not street-level criminals. They were sophisticated operators with connections to organized crime groups across multiple countries. But from the moment they arrived in LA, the FBI was watching every move, every phone call, every meeting. June 10, 2008. 3 men landed at LAX San Diego, 1 Russian, 1 Persian, and 1 Canadian. They were not there for business meetings or sightseeing. They were there to buy 24 kilograms of cocaine from what they believed was a former KGB agent with connections to Colombian suppliers. That former KGB agent was actually an FBI informant wearing a wire, and the cocaine was supplied by the Bureau as part of an ongoing sting operation targeting international drug trafficking networks. Ryan Wedding had never handled a deal this big, and to FBI agents monitoring the operation, it showed in every aspect of his behavior. He never asked where the cocaine was coming from, a basic security question that experienced traffickers always ask. He appeared in person rather than using a middleman, another rookie mistake that exposed him to unnecessary risk. When the Russian contact, Yuri Trofimov, demanded to see the money up front, Ryan refused, saying he needed a few days to access it through the Hawala network. This angered Trofimov, who had a reputation for violence that scared even hardened criminals. He was still willing to deal, so they agreed to a modified plan: sell them 1 kilogram first as a test, then complete the larger transaction later. The FBI had agents posted throughout the airport and surrounding areas, ready to make arrests at multiple locations. But when the plan shifted, they had to adapt their surveillance and arrest strategy in real time. On June 13, 2008, Ryan and Shirini visited a Persian rug store in San Diego that doubled as a Hawala broker. This was not unusual. Many legitimate businesses in immigrant communities also facilitate money transfers for people who do not trust or have access to traditional banking. They picked up $120,000 wrapped in newspaper and the deal was officially on. But as soon as the Russian handed over $17,000 for 1 kilogram of cocaine, FBI agents moved in from multiple directions. Ryan Wedding was arrested as he left the hotel room in San Diego, with hours of recorded calls and meetings presented as evidence. The operation was swift and professional. Ryan found himself in federal custody, facing charges that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. Hassan Shirini and the Russian contact quickly agreed to plea deals and cooperation agreements with prosecutors, but Ryan Wedding refused to cooperate. FBI agent Brett Keena later told Rolling Stone that Ryan was very controlled. Once the agents read him his rights, he did not say anything. He was, Keena said, kind of like, "You are not getting anything from me." This defiance would prove to be both a character trait and a strategic mistake that would define the rest of Ryan Wedding's criminal career. Ryan Wedding was convicted of conspiring to traffic cocaine, with a mandatory minimum of 10 years. But during his sentencing hearing, he put on the performance of his life, channeling the same focus and determination that had once made him an Olympic athlete. He told the judge what appeared to be genuine remorse. "What I did was completely out of character for me, and it's a personal mission of mine to rebuild my reputation." As an athlete, I was always taught that there are no second chances, and I'm here asking for exactly that. The court bought it completely. They imposed a lower sentence than initially intended, 48 months, minus time served, meaning Ryan would be out in less than 3 years instead of the decade he was facing. But the judge did not realize that Ryan Wedding was not planning the kind of rehabilitation they had in mind. For 2 years, he was held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego, a federal facility that housed inmates awaiting trial for a range of federal offenses, including lower-level members of Mexican drug trafficking organizations, particularly mules who specialized in moving drugs across the border. This facility became Ryan's graduate school in international drug trafficking. He was surrounded by people with connections to the Sinaloa Cartel, Colombian suppliers, and sophisticated money laundering operations. These were not street-level dealers. They were professionals who understood the logistics of moving tons of drugs across international borders. FBI agent Brett Keena later admitted that they really did just turn him into a much better drug dealer than he was when he started with us, and that you have people in that facility who have amazing drug world connections. While in custody, Ryan demonstrated the same organizational skills that had made him a successful athlete. He organized up to 5 girlfriends back home to wash his car, clean his apartment, and collect money from associates to pay his creditors. He maintained a network of contacts and kept his business relationships active, even from behind bars. More importantly, he made phone calls to male associates, boasting about the good connections he was making in custody. These were not idle boasts. Ryan was systematically building relationships with people who could help him establish a much larger operation upon his release. He learned about sophisticated communication methods using encrypted messaging apps, money laundering techniques involving cryptocurrency and shell companies, and most crucially, how to establish relationships with Mexican cartels that could provide protection and supply lines. Prison was not correcting Ryan Wedding. It was giving him a master's degree in international drug trafficking, taught by some of the most experienced criminals in the world. When Ryan returned to Canada in 2011, he settled in Montreal, a city where the drug trade was wide-open territory. The old Italian-American mafia control was crumbling, and the market had become much more entrepreneurial. You could work with the Sinaloa Cartel without even knowing other operators existed just towns away. Montreal in the early 2010s was perfect for someone with Ryan's ambitions. The city was a major port with connections to Europe and South America. It had established networks for moving contraband, and law enforcement was focused on traditional organized crime rather than the new generation of international traffickers. By February 2014, Ryan had filed for bankruptcy, claiming to be unemployed and relying solely on family financial support. In his sworn statement, he wrote that, due to being in prison for several years and unable to work and contribute to the household, he was unable to fulfill his financial obligations as they became due. On paper, he was broke, living in a gated condo complex in Coquitlam with his wife, leasing a Ford F-350 pickup, and declaring no income. But privately, something massive was underway. In January 2015, an undercover officer who used the name Joe traveled to Montreal to meet with Filipos Collaros, a man with direct ties to Ivan Guzman, known as El Chapo. At their meeting in a Montreal restaurant, Collaros told Joe he had brought the man in charge. Moments later, Ryan Wedding walked in and introduced himself as a cocaine importer. From that moment, Joe realized he was dealing with a seasoned operator who had learned from his previous mistakes. Wedding asked detailed questions about boat capacity, mapped out transfer routes considering weather patterns and law enforcement patrol schedules, and together they planned a sophisticated operation that would dwarf anything Ryan had attempted before. The plan was ambitious. A large research vessel would collect shipments from St. Kitts in the Caribbean, then transfer them at sea to smaller fishing trawlers that could deliver the load discreetly to remote shores in Newfoundland. From there, the cocaine would be transported overland to major Canadian cities and across the border into the United States. They agreed on a test run of 500 to 1,000 kilograms of cocaine, more than 20 times larger than the deal that had landed Ryan in prison. Joe would take a 25% cut of the shipment's value as his fee, which would have been worth millions of dollars. But on April 20th, 2015, the RCMP launched coordinated raids across Canada, issuing 15 arrest warrants, including one for Ryan Wedding. The operation, called Project Harrington, was designed to disrupt the cocaine pipeline between Mexico and Canada. When police arrived at his Montreal condo to make the arrest, Ryan was already gone. He had fled to Mexico and into the protection of the Sinaloa cartel, using connections he had cultivated during his time in prison. What happened next was the transformation of Ryan Wedding from a mid-level drug dealer into what the FBI would later call a modern-day Pablo Escobar. From his base in Mexico, Wedding began building a transnational machine with his second-in-command, Andrew Clark, a Toronto-based elevator mechanic who had relocated to Mexico in 2022. Clark was not just muscle. He was an intelligent operator who understood logistics and could manage complex operations across multiple countries. They worked directly with the Sinaloa Cartel, which by this time had become the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world. The cartel provided protection, supply lines, and most importantly, the infrastructure needed to move massive quantities of cocaine from South America to North America. The route was sophisticated and constantly evolving. Cocaine was sourced from labs in Colombia, transported through established cartel corridors in Mexico, then smuggled across the U.S. border into Southern California, where Los Angeles became their primary logistics hub. The choice of Los Angeles was not random. The city had established networks for moving contraband, multiple ports and airports for international shipments, and according to prosecutors, relatively weak state laws that meant lighter sentences if operators were caught with cocaine. From Los Angeles, the drugs were stored in a network of stash houses managed by trusted associates. These were not amateur operations. They were professional facilities with security systems, climate control, and sophisticated inventory management. When Wedding or Clark had a load ready to move, it was transported north to Canada, using long-haul semi-trucks driven by professional smugglers who understood border-crossing procedures and had clean records that would not attract attention. The numbers were almost incomprehensible. Federal prosecutors claim Wedding's organization was importing 60 metric tons of cocaine into the USA every single year. That is roughly the weight of 40 standard cars. At conservative street values, this represented nearly $500 million annually in gross revenue. But moving that much product required absolute control and sophisticated security measures. Wedding's network used a form of two-factor authentication that would be familiar to anyone in cybersecurity. They would text photos of banknotes showing serial numbers to confirm identities along the transportation chain. These tokens had to match exactly for transfers to happen, ensuring that law enforcement could not easily infiltrate the network. The organization had multiple layers of security. Drivers did not know the ultimate destination of their loads. Stash house operators did not know where drugs were coming from. Money launderers did not know the source of funds they were cleaning. This compartmentalization meant that if one part of the network was compromised, the rest could continue operating. When shipments were stolen or people crossed the organization, Wedding's response was swift and brutal. This was not just about recovering losses. It was about maintaining the fear and respect that kept a billion-dollar operation running smoothly. The indictments paint a picture of an organization that used murder as a routine business tool. Wedding is accused of ordering hits over drug debts, stolen shipments, and perceived disrespect, with multiple killings attributed to his network across Canada and the United States. The violence was not random. It was calculated. and designed to send messages to anyone who might consider crossing the organization. Wedding learned from his time in prison that in the international drug trade, a reputation for violence was often more valuable than actual violence itself. In November 2023, Wedding allegedly ordered the murder of a truck driver he believed had stolen 300 kilograms of cocaine from a shipment. The missing drugs represented millions of dollars in lost revenue, but more importantly, allowing the theft to go unpunished would signal weakness to other associates. But the hit team got it catastrophically wrong. On November 20th, 2023, they broke into a rental property on Mayfield Road near the Caledon-Brampton border, believing they were targeting the truck driver's family. Instead, they found innocent people who had no connection to drug trafficking whatsoever. Jagtar Singh Sadhu, 57, was visiting from India with his wife, Harbhajan Kaur Sadhu, 55. They had been staying with their daughter Jasprit and son Garrett for 4 months and were planning to return to India in January. On the morning of November 20th, Jagtar had told his daughter, "If we don't talk today, it will be never. And remember one thing, the day I die, I will tell myself that I love my daughter more than anyone else in this world." That night around 11:30 p.m., as Jasprit was getting ready for bed, she saw a man standing in the hallway. She watched her father collapse from gunfire, heard her mother scream, and then there was complete silence except for the sound of gunshots. Jagtar was killed instantly. Harbhajan was shot 22 times and died in the hospital 2 weeks later. Jasprit, shot 13 times, survived, but still has a bullet lodged in her spine that doctors determined was too dangerous to remove without risking paralysis or coma. The family had absolutely nothing to do with drug trafficking. They were innocent victims of mistaken identity, targeted because Wedding's assassins got the wrong address in their rush to carry out his orders. Another execution came on April 1st, 2024, in Niagara Falls. Wedding's associate Andrew Clark allegedly ordered the hit, carried out by Malik Damian Cunningham, known by the nickname Mr. Perfect. The target was Randy Feeder, a 29-year-old American-Canadian citizen shot at close range in his driveway before the killer fled. Clark had been systematically training Cunningham for these operations. After Cunningham was released from the Toronto South Detention Center, Clark arranged for him to travel to Mexico, where he already underwent weapons training ranging from small arms to long-range rifles under a program modeled on military instruction. Once trained, Cunningham was sent back to Canada with a list of targets and payment schedules. His first assignment came with a payment of $100,000. Additional contracts offered $200,000 to kill a real estate agent in Vancouver, more than twice that amount for a group in Toronto, and $1 million for a target in Dubai. But Wedding's most brazen act of violence was yet to come, and it would ultimately contribute to his downfall. After Wedding was indicted in 2024, a federal witness was scheduled to testify against him. This witness, later identified as Jonathan Acevedo Garcia, had been a key figure in Wedding's organization and possessed detailed knowledge of the network's operations, financial structure, and violent activities. According to prosecutors, Wedding's own lawyer allegedly advised him that if Victor A. was killed, the charges against them and related extradition proceedings would necessarily be dismissed. This legal advice, if true, represents one of the most shocking examples of attorney misconduct in recent memory. Wedding took this advice to its logical and horrifying conclusion. He placed a $5 million bounty on the witness's head and orchestrated a sophisticated assassination plot that demonstrated the international reach of his organization. Wedding used a Canadian website called Dirty News to post photographs of the witness and his wife, essentially crowdsourcing the location of his target. The operation was technologically sophisticated and professionally executed. They used an $18,500 phone interception tool to track the witness's location and movements. They had photographers ready to document the killing as proof that the contract had been fulfilled. The level of planning and resources devoted to this single murder demonstrated just how much Wedding's organization had evolved since his early days as a marijuana grower. On January 31st, 2025, while Jonathan Acevedo Garcia was eating lunch at a restaurant in Medellin, Colombia, a gunman walked in and shot him 5 times in the head in broad daylight. The attack was carried out in public, in front of witnesses, demonstrating the killer's confidence that he could escape without consequences. Immediately after the murder, Wedding sent a photograph of the victim's corpse to his associates, not just as proof that the contract had been completed, but as a message to anyone else who might consider cooperating with authorities. This wasn't just murder, it was terrorism designed to intimidate witnesses and obstruct justice on an international scale. But here is where Ryan Wedding made the fatal mistake that would lead to his downfall. He got comfortable. Too comfortable. Despite being on the FBI most wanted list with a $15 million reward for his capture, Wedding could not resist the lifestyle he had built. According to sources, he was living lavishly in Mexico, protected by the Sinaloa Cartel, and seemingly untouchable. The lifestyle was everything he had dreamed of as a young athlete watching other people live in luxury. He had multiple properties, a collection of high-end motorcycles, custom vehicles, and the kind of respect and fear that comes with running a billion-dollar criminal enterprise. But Wedding's biggest weakness was his ego. He could not completely disappear because he needed people to know who he was and what he had accomplished. He maintained communication with his network, made decisions about operations, and continued to live as if he were untouchable. The FBI had been tracking his assets for months, building a comprehensive picture of his organization's financial structure. In December 2024, they got a major breakthrough when Mexican authorities seized Wedding's prized motorcycle collection. 62 motorcycles valued at $40 million, along with his custom Mercedes-Benz worth $14 million. Drugs including cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl, artwork, and 2 Olympic medals he had kept as trophies from his former life. The seizure was not just about recovering assets. It was intelligence gathering that provided crucial information about his location, his associates, and operational patterns. But Wedding's biggest mistake was not the flashy lifestyle. It was his digital footprint. Despite being one of the world's most wanted fugitives, he could not resist maintaining some level of online presence and communication with his network, using encrypted messaging apps. FBI Director Kash Patel later revealed that Wedding had been using Threema and other encrypted platforms, believing he was safe under cartel protection in Mexico. But even encrypted communications leave digital traces that sophisticated law enforcement agencies can follow. On the night of January 22, 2026, Ryan Wedding's decade-long run as a fugitive came to an end in a coordinated international operation that showed the global reach of modern law enforcement. Working closely with Mexican authorities and the DEA, the FBI had been on Wedding's trail for more than a month. The seizure of his motorcycle collection in December provided crucial intelligence about his location and movement patterns. More importantly, it disrupted his sense of security and forced him to change his routines. The operation that led to his capture was the result of months of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and coordination between multiple agencies across several countries. Ambassador Ron Johnson, working from the new U.S. Embassy compound in Mexico, made Wedding's capture a priority from the moment he arrived at his post. At a press conference announcing the capture, FBI Director Kash Patel revealed the scope of the investigation. This was a coordinated, intelligence-driven investigation into Wedding's global drug trafficking organization, which used Los Angeles as its primary point of distribution. Our collective efforts led to the seizure of more than 2,300 kilograms of cocaine, 44 kilograms of methamphetamine, 44 kilograms of fentanyl, 8 firearms, and over $55 million in illicit assets. The numbers were staggering, but they represented only a fraction of the total value that had flowed through Wedding's organization over the years. Wedding was arrested just outside Mexico City without incident, a testament to the professionalism of the Mexican authorities who carried out the operation. He was immediately transported to Ontario International Airport, arriving on a government plane at 7:53 p.m. directly from Mexico City. The man who once represented Canada on the Olympic stage was now in LAPD custody, facing charges that could put him away for life: murder, witness tampering, money laundering, and drug trafficking on an international scale. Ryan Wedding's capture represents the end of what prosecutors called a billion-dollar criminal enterprise that terrorized communities across North America. But the damage he caused will last far longer than any prison sentence he might receive. The human cost of Wedding's criminal empire is impossible to calculate. Families destroyed by violence, communities flooded with drugs, young people whose lives were derailed by addiction, all because an Olympic athlete decided that his dreams of wealth and power were worth more than human life. Jasprit Sadhu, the daughter who survived being shot 13 times in the mistaken identity killing, still hears her mother's screams every day. She said, "I can never forget that." Speaking about Wedding, her words were clear and haunting. He will have to face his karma. The investigation into Wedding's organization led to the arrest of 36 people across multiple countries. The Treasury Department sanctioned 19 individuals, including Wedding himself. Authorities seized mountains of drugs, cash, weapons, luxury vehicles, motorcycles, artwork, and jewelry, worth tens of millions of dollars. But beyond the statistics and seizures, Wedding's story represents something deeper about the choices we make and their consequences. He had everything: Olympic glory, family support, natural talent, and opportunities most people never get. He came from privilege, had access to resources, and possessed the intelligence and drive to succeed in legitimate endeavors. Yet he chose a path that led to violence, destruction, and ultimately his own downfall. Wedding's story is a cautionary tale about how quickly someone can fall from grace when they choose the wrong path. And it is also a story about how arrogance and comfort can become fatal weaknesses even for the most successful criminals. From Olympic slopes to FBI's most wanted, Ryan Wedding's story shows us that no one is above the law, no matter how far they run or how powerful their protection. His comfort became his weakness. His arrogance became his downfall, and his choices destroyed not just his own life, but countless others. If you want to see more stories about how the mighty have fallen, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Until next time, stay safe out there.
Her name appears on a U.S. Treasury sanctions list right next to war criminals and terrorists, but there's no mugshot, no arrest warrant, no federal indictment waiting in a courthouse somewhere. Just a name, Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia, buried in financial documents that froze assets worth potentially billions of dollars. The daughter of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the man who ran the Sinaloa cartel for over 4 decades without ever seeing the inside of a prison cell. While her brothers made headlines with arrests and shootouts, while El Chapo's sons became Instagram legends flaunting wealth and weapons, Monica stayed invisible. No social media presence, no paparazzi photos, no leaked videos from nightclub VIP sections, just whispers in Culiacan about the woman who allegedly controlled the financial arteries of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. The Treasury Department sanctioned her in 2021. They claimed she was part of a network moving cartel money through front companies and legitimate businesses. But here's what makes her story different from every other cartel princess you've heard about. She might be the smartest one, because while everyone else fought for the throne and the spotlight, she allegedly built an empire in the shadows. An empire measured not in bullets, but in bank accounts. Not in territory, but in untraceable wealth. If the sons are soldiers playing a short game that ends in prison or death, the daughter might be playing something entirely different. A long game, a quiet game, a billionaire's game. Stay with me until the end, because we're breaking down the life of the woman who might be El Mayo's true heir, the cartel princess who never needed a crown, the invisible billionaire who proves that real power doesn't announce itself, it just exists, protected by silence and strategy. Let's break it down. Monica del Rosario Zambada. Garcia was born into a family that doesn't exist on paper, but controls entire regions of Mexico in reality. Her father, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, is a ghost, 76 years old as of 2024, and never arrested, never imprisoned, never even photographed clearly by law enforcement in decades. He built the Sinaloa cartel alongside El Chapo, but while Chapo chased fame and power publicly, Mayo operated like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, quietly, strategically, always 3 moves ahead. Think about what that means for Monica. She wasn't raised in poverty dreaming of wealth. She was born into established power, born into a family where politicians attended birthday parties, where federal police provided security, where entire towns existed to serve and protect her family's interests. The Zambada family has been described as hidden royalty in narco culture. Not the flashy royalty that posts photos with tigers and gold-plated guns. The real royalty, the kind that owns the town but never needs to say it out loud. The kind where everyone knows who you are, but nobody ever speaks your name in public. Monica grew up in Culiacan, Sinaloa, the capital of cartel country. But unlike the sons of cartel leaders who grew up learning to shoot and fight, the daughters learned something different. They learned discretion. They learned how to move money without touching it. They learned that real power is invisible power. Her brothers, Vicente Zambada Niebla, Serafin Zambada Ortiz, they became operators. They got involved in the trafficking, the violence, the street-level control, and eventually they got caught. Vicente is serving 15 years in U.S. federal prison. Serafin was arrested at the border. The sons followed the traditional path of cartel heirs, and the traditional path leads to one of 2 places, prison or a grave. But Monica, different trajectory entirely. She stayed out of the headlines, stayed away from the drug operations, never got photographed at narco parties or caught on surveillance doing anything that could build a criminal case. And according to federal investigators, that wasn't weakness or fear, that was strategy, because what good is inheriting an empire if you're going to lose it the same way your brothers did? What good is billions of dollars if you can't actually spend it because you're in a supermax prison? Monica allegedly learned the lesson that most cartel heirs never learn. Violence is temporary, but money is forever. Cartels rise and fall based on who controls the guns. But financial networks, those can last generations if you build them right. And according to the U.S. Treasury Department, that's exactly what she did. Let me tell you about the difference between power you can see and power you can't. When federal agents raided properties connected to El Mayo's organization over the years, they found what you'd expect: weapons caches, stashes, safe houses with escape tunnels. But they also found something else: a sophisticated financial network that moved money through dozens of legitimate businesses, land holdings, agricultural companies, and front operations that looked clean on paper. And Monica's name kept appearing in the investigation files. In March 2021, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, officially sanctioned Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia. They named her alongside her mother, Rosario Niebla Cardosa, and several sisters as part of a network supporting El Mayo's financial operations. Here's what the sanctions specifically alleged: that Monica and other family members helped manage assets for the Zambada organization. Front companies, real estate holdings, ranches that generated legitimate income while serving as operational bases, agricultural businesses that could explain large cash deposits, the kind of infrastructure that turns drug money into clean money. But here's what makes this fascinating. The Treasury Department doesn't need a criminal conviction to sanction someone. They just need evidence that you're part of a financial support network for a designated criminal organization, which means Monica has never been charged with a crime, never been indicted, never been arrested, or publicly wanted by U.S. law enforcement. She's powerful enough to be named, quiet enough to never be caught. Think about how that network might have operated. Picture Monica not in a warehouse counting drug money, but in an office reviewing corporate documents, not meeting with sicarios, but with lawyers and accountants who structure deals that pass every audit, not trafficking, but trafficking legitimacy. Women in the Zambada family, according to investigators, were linked to cattle ranches that generated millions in revenue, farmland operations that employed hundreds of people legitimately while serving as money laundering fronts, real estate portfolios that appreciated in value while cleaning cartel profits, investment vehicles so sophisticated that tracking the money required forensic accountants and years of investigation. This wasn't the old model of stuffing cash into duffel bags and burying it in the desert. This was corporate level financial engineering. This was turning a criminal empire into a business empire that could survive even if every trafficker in the organization got arrested tomorrow. She didn't need a throne to rule. Her influence was quieter, sharper, and visible. Because here's the thing about real wealth. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need security convoys and gold chains and Instagram posts. Real wealth moves in silence. It exists in property deeds and corporate registrations and offshore accounts that take federal investigators years to untangle. And if the allegations are true, Monica became the architect of that system. Let me paint you a picture of what invisible billionaire life might look like in Culiacan. The properties aren't flashy mansions with gates announcing cartel money. They're elegant homes in exclusive neighborhoods. High walls, yes, but tasteful. Security cameras, definitely, but discreet. From the street, they look like any other wealthy family's residence in Mexico. Maybe a doctor's home, maybe a successful businessman's compound, but inside, that's where the reality reveals itself. Marble floors imported from Italy, chandeliers that cost more than most houses, furniture custom designed by craftsmen who never ask questions about who's paying, wine cellars stocked with bottles worth thousands each, art collections featuring pieces that should be in museums but somehow ended up in private homes. The ranches are even more revealing. Sprawling properties in Sinaloa countryside, thousands of acres of farmland, cattle operations, horse breeding facilities. These places generate legitimate income. They employ local workers, they pay taxes, they look clean, but they also serve as operational bases. Private airstrips for planes that never file flight plans. Warehouses that hold more than just farming equipment, security teams that seem excessive for agricultural operations, the kind of infrastructure that serves two purposes, one visible, one invisible. And Monica allegedly moved through all of this with complete discretion. No social media presence revealing locations, no leaked photos from society events, no interviews with lifestyle magazines showing off homes and cars, nothing that could give law enforcement visual evidence or location data. Think about what that level of operational security requires. It means every person in your life is vetted. It means every property is registered through layers of corporate entities. It means every financial transaction is structured to avoid triggering reporting requirements. It means living in luxury but never showing it publicly. Armored convoys that look like regular SUVs. Bodyguards who dress like business associates. Homes that feature panic rooms and escape routes but look like normal wealthy residences. The entire lifestyle designed around a single principle: never give them anything they can use against you. The wealth is there, the luxury exists, but it's protected by the most effective security system ever invented: silence. No photos means no evidence. No social media means no location tracking. No public appearances mean no surveillance footage. She exists in the world of the extremely wealthy, but she's a ghost in that world, present but invisible. And that invisibility might be worth more than any amount of money. Now let's talk about what little is known about Monica's personal life, because even relationships in this world are strategic. There are rumors, unconfirmed, unverified, but persistent, that Monica is married. Some reports suggest ties to men within cartel-connected families. Others claim marriages into wealthy business families with historical ties to Sinaloa's power structure. But here's what you need to understand about marriages at this level of organized crime. They're not about love, they're about alliances. In narco culture, particularly in old school Sinaloa cartel families, marriages function like royal arrangements. They connect organizations, they strengthen networks, they create family bonds that protect business interests and provide loyalty that goes deeper than any contract. If Monica married into another powerful family, that marriage represents the merger of resources, territory, and influence. It means combining financial networks. It means shared protection and mutual benefit. It means two families now have a reason to support each other's survival. Think about it like this. Her father, El Mayo, maintained power for 40 years, partially through strategic family connections. Marriages created alliances with other trafficking organizations. They brought together different factions under shared family interests. They turned potential rivals into relatives. And if Monica followed that model, her marriage isn't a personal choice. It's a business decision made by people whose business is worth billions. But again, we don't actually know. No wedding photos have surfaced. No marriage records are publicly available. No social media posts celebrating anniversaries or family life, just whispers and speculation and occasional mentions in investigation documents that reference family connections without specific details. The silence around her personal life is as strategic as everything else, because relationships can be investigated, spouses can be subpoenaed, family connections can become evidence in federal cases. The less that's known publicly, the less prosecutors have to work with. Romance is a liability when you're allegedly managing a criminal empire's finances. So if Monica is married, if she has children, if she has a family life, it's protected by the same operational security that protects everything else about her existence. In this world, love is real, but survival comes first. Here's where Monica's situation gets legally interesting. In March 2021, the U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned her through OFAC. That sanction designated her as a person providing material support to the Zambada drug trafficking organization. It froze any assets she might have in U.S. financial institutions. It prohibited U.S. persons from doing business with her. It essentially cut her off from the U.S. financial system entirely. But, and this is critical, a Treasury sanction is not a criminal charge. It's a financial penalty, not a legal prosecution. Monica is not publicly listed on FBI most wanted lists. She doesn't appear on DEA fugitive databases. There's no public federal indictment waiting for her in any U.S. district court. At least not that's been unsealed or made public as of now. What does that mean? It means federal investigators believe she's involved enough to punish financially, but either they don't have evidence for criminal charges, or they're building a case that hasn't been revealed yet, or they've made a strategic decision not to prosecute. Think about the calculation from the government's perspective. If you indict Monica, you have to prove her crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. You need witnesses who can testify about her specific actions. You need documents showing she personally directed illegal activity. You need evidence that would convince a jury. But with sanctions, you just need evidence that she's part of the support network. The burden of proof is lower. The political and legal complications are fewer, and you still achieve the goal of disrupting the financial network. So Monica exists in this strange legal space, sanctioned but not wanted, named but not indicted, powerful enough to be targeted by the US government, but quiet enough that they apparently can't build a criminal case or haven't chosen to yet, powerful enough to be named, quiet enough to never be found. And that might be the most impressive thing about her alleged operation. She stayed just far enough from direct criminal activity that prosecution becomes difficult. She's allegedly close enough to the money to benefit from it, but distant enough from the violence and trafficking that building a criminal conspiracy case becomes nearly impossible. It's the difference between being a drug trafficker and being a financial consultant who happens to work for drug traffickers. One gets you life in prison, the other gets you sanctions that you can potentially work around if you're sophisticated enough. And if the allegations are true, Monica is very sophisticated. Let's talk about why Monica might be more valuable to El Mayo than all his sons combined. Her brothers are in U.S. federal prison. Vicente Zambada Niebla, arrested in 2009, extradited to the United States, sentenced to 15 years. Serafine Zambada Ortiz, caught at the border, also extradited, served time and was released. Both followed the traditional path of cartel heirs. They learned the drug business, they operated in the organization, and they got caught. That's the pattern for cartel sons. They're raised to be soldiers, operators, enforcers. They learn violence and trafficking. They build reputations. They take risks. And eventually, almost inevitably, those risks lead to arrest or death. But Monica represents a different model entirely. Low profile equals long-term safety. Every cartel boss who's been captured or killed in the last 20 years, what got them caught? Visibility, phone intercepts from constant communication, surveillance from patterns of movement, informants who knew their locations. The more visible you are, the more vulnerable you become. Monica's invisibility is her armor. No patterns to track, no phone calls to intercept, no public presence to monitor. She's allegedly running a sophisticated financial operation, but she's doing it quietly enough that building a case becomes extremely difficult. Business intelligence instead of violence. The future of organized crime isn't sicarios and street wars. It's money laundering and legitimate business fronts and financial engineering. It's understanding that the real power is in controlling the money, not controlling the territory. If Monica learned that lesson and built her role around it, she's more valuable than 100 gunmen. Less media attention means more protection. Think about El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos. They're famous, they're in corridors, they have social media presence. And what has that fame gotten them? Multiple arrests, constant surveillance, and a short life expectancy. The DEA knows their faces, knows their habits, knows how to find them. Monica, they know her name from treasury documents, but what else? No photos to distribute, no social media to monitor, no public behavior patterns to analyze. She's a name in a file, and that's exponentially harder to prosecute than a visible target, possibly trusted with financial arteries of the cartel. If you're El Mayo and you're thinking about legacy, what matters more? Your sons who might spend the next 20 years in prison, or your daughter who allegedly built the financial network sophisticated enough that it could survive even if the entire drug trafficking operation got shut down tomorrow? The money is what lasts. The money is what provides for family for generations. The money is what buys protection and lawyers and political influence. And if Monica controls that money, she might be the most important person in the entire organization. Here's the thing about El Mayo's 40-year run without arrest. He's not just lucky, he's strategic. He's a businessman who happens to run a drug cartel, not a drug lord who tries to run a business. And if he raised one daughter to think the same way, to prioritize financial sustainability over street reputation, to value invisibility over fame, that's not just smart parenting, that's succession planning. The sons represent the old model The daughter might represent the future. So let's bring this full circle, because Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia's story is about what we don't see. No viral photos from luxury vacations. No court mugshots after dramatic arrests. No Instagram presence showing designer clothes and expensive cars. No leaked videos from parties with other cartel elites. Just a name buried in U.S. sanction files and investigation reports that most people will never read. She exists in the negative space of the drug war. While everyone watches the sons and the violence and the arrests and the spectacle, she's allegedly built something more dangerous: financial infrastructure that could outlast any cartel leader's arrest or death. Think about what that means for the future of organized crime. The old model was territorial control through violence. The new model might be financial control through legitimate business. The old model made you famous and got you killed or imprisoned. The new model makes you invisible and potentially untouchable. If the Treasury Department's allegations are true, Monica helped build that new model. She proved that you don't need to be a trafficker to profit from trafficking. You don't need to order murders to maintain power. You don't need to be famous to be important. You just need to understand that real wealth is patient, quiet, and legal looking enough to survive scrutiny. The sons were raised to be soldiers in a war they couldn't win long term. Every soldier eventually falls, but Monica was allegedly raised to be something different: a financial architect, a legitimate businesswoman whose companies just happen to serve cartel interests, someone who can sit in a lawyer's office or a bank meeting and look like any other wealthy Mexican heir managing family assets. That's the evolution we're watching in real time. The transition from cartels to corporations, from kingpins to CEOs, from violent organizations to financial networks that use violence when necessary, but prefer the clean efficiency of money laundering and legitimate business fronts. And Monica might be the prototype. No one can confirm her exact net worth. No one knows precisely what role she plays in her father's organization. No one has photos of her current appearance or confirmed information about where she lives or what her daily life looks like. She's a ghost with a Treasury Department file, a billionaire who might not exist outside of financial documents, a woman who proves that in the modern drug war, the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. If the sons are soldiers fighting a war with expiration dates measured in years, the daughter might be playing an entirely different game, a generational game, a game where wealth compounds quietly while everyone else makes headlines that lead to prison cells. El Mayo stayed free for 40 years by being smarter than everyone hunting him, by being invisible when others chase fame, by understanding that real power doesn't need an audience. And if Monica learned those lessons, if she built her life around those principles, if she's actually the heir to a multi-billion-dollar financial network, then she might be the most successful cartel princess in history. Not because she's the most violent, not because she's the most famous, but because she's the one nobody saw, the one who built an empire in silence while everyone was watching the spectacle elsewhere. The cartel princess who never needed to show her face, because showing your face is what gets you caught. And Monica del Rosario Zambada Garcia has never been caught.
Drug kingpin Ishmael Zambada Garcia, also known as El Mayo, has confessed to a lifetime of crime.
What if I told you that while most 28-year-olds are still figuring out their careers, one man from rural Mexico had already built a billion-dollar empire? By the time Ismael El Mayo Zambada turned 28, he wasn't just rich. He was operating one of the most profitable drug networks in North America, moving millions of dollars worth of product every single month. This wasn't some overnight success story or lucky break. This was pure business genius mixed with ruthless strategy, starting from absolutely nothing in the mountains of Sinaloa. While other young traffickers were getting flashy and getting caught, Mayo was building an empire so quietly that even today, most people don't know his name. But here's the crazy part. The blueprint he used to hit that billion-dollar mark is actually a masterclass in entrepreneurship, just applied to the most dangerous industry on earth. Stick around because I'm about to break down exactly how a poor farm kid became one of the richest criminals in history before his 30th birthday, and why his strategy was so effective that it kept him free for over 50 years. Let me paint you a picture of where this all started. We're talking about rural Sinaloa, Mexico in the 1960s, a place where poverty wasn't just common, it was the only reality most families knew. Ismael Zambada was born into this world on New Year's Day, 1948, in a tiny ranch village where running water was a luxury and steady income was a fantasy. His family survived like most others in the region through subsistence farming, occasional work for wealthier landowners, and whatever odd jobs they could find. Mayo's father worked the fields, his mother raised the children, and everyone understood that education beyond basic literacy was a privilege they couldn't afford. But here's what made Sinaloa different from other poor regions. It sat right in the heart of what locals called the Golden Triangle, a mountainous area perfect for growing opium poppies and marijuana. For generations, farmers in these mountains had been cultivating these crops, not because they were criminals, but because it was literally the only way to survive. The geography was perfect for this kind of agriculture. The remote mountain valleys were difficult for authorities to access. The climate was ideal for growing both marijuana and opium poppies, and the terrain provided natural protection from law enforcement. More importantly, there was a growing market for these products in the United States. By the time Mayo was a teenager in the mid-1960s, the drug economy was already the backbone of his community. American demand for marijuana was exploding thanks to the counterculture movement, and Mexican farmers were the primary suppliers. Young Americans were experimenting with in unprecedented numbers, creating a market that Mexican farmers were perfectly positioned to serve. But here's the thing that young Mayo noticed early on. Farmers were making pennies while the traffickers were making fortunes. A farmer might sell his entire marijuana harvest for a few $100s, while that same product would be worth thousands once it reached American buyers. The profit margins were insane, but only if you could figure out how to move up the supply chain. This is where Mayo's entrepreneurial mind started working. He wasn't content to just grow crops like his family had done for generations. He wanted to understand the entire supply chain, from the mountain farms all the way to the American buyers. And that curiosity would become the foundation of his billion-dollar empire. Mayo's entry into the drug world wasn't dramatic, it was calculated. Around 1965, when he was just 17, he started working as an opium poppy farmer in the mountains. But unlike other farmers who just grew their crops and sold them to whoever showed up, Mayo was studying the business. He spent his days working the fields, but his evenings asking questions. Who were the buyers? Where did the product go after it left the mountains? How much were people paying at each level of the supply chain? Most farmers didn't care about these details. They just wanted to get paid for their crops. But Mayo understood that knowledge was power. He quickly realized that the drug economy worked like any other supply chain. You had the growers at the bottom making the least money, then you had collectors who bought from multiple farmers, then transporters who moved the product down the mountains, and finally the big traffickers who sold to American buyers. The further up the chain you went, the bigger the profits. So Mayo started making moves. Instead of just growing his own poppies, he began organizing groups of local farmers. He'd buy their opium paste in bulk, then resell it to bigger traffickers for a significant markup. This wasn't just about making more money, it was about building relationships and understanding how the entire network operated. What made Mayo different was his approach to these relationships. While other young men in the business relied on intimidation or family connections, Mayo built trust through reliability. When he said he'd deliver a certain quantity of product on a specific date, he delivered. When he promised a certain quality, that's what buyers received. In a business where trust was rare, Mayo's consistency made him valuable. By his early 20s, Mayo controlled multiple villages and their poppy fields. He wasn't just a farmer anymore, he was becoming a regional coordinator. He built a network of loyal workers, suppliers, and transporters. More importantly, he started paying locals for protection and silence, creating a community that had a vested interest in his success. This community investment strategy was genius. Instead of ruling through fear like many traffickers, Mayo made himself indispensable to entire villages. He provided steady income to farmers, jobs to young men who had no other opportunities, and economic stability to communities that had never experienced it before. This created a network of people who would protect him not out of fear, but out of economic necessity. Mayo also began investing in infrastructure during this period. He helped build better roads to remote farming areas, making it easier to transport product. He funded communication systems that allowed farmers to coordinate with buyers more effectively. He even invested in basic medical facilities for rural communities, further cementing his role as a benefactor rather than just a criminal. This is where you can see Mayo's business genius starting to emerge. While other young traffickers were focused on quick cash and flashy lifestyles, Mayo was building infrastructure. He controlled collection routes, transportation networks, and had entire rural regions under his influence. He was creating the foundation for something much bigger. Mayo's network wasn't just about moving drugs. It was about controlling information. He developed an intelligence system that tracks law enforcement movements, rival trafficker activities, and market conditions. This information advantage allowed him to avoid problems before they became serious and identify opportunities that others missed. He also began recruiting talent systematically. Mayo identified young men in rural communities who showed intelligence, loyalty, and ambition. He brought them into his organization and trained them in different aspects of the business: transportation, security, communications, and financial management. This created a pipeline of capable lieutenants who could expand his operations. The breakthrough came in the early 1970s. When his consistency and reliability caught the attention of the emerging Guadalajara cartel. These weren't just local traffickers. These were the guys connected to the big money, the ones with access to smuggling routes, protection networks, and most importantly, Colombian cocaine suppliers. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, who would become known as El Padrino, or the Godfather, was building what would become Mexico's first major drug cartel. He was looking for reliable regional operators who could handle large-scale operations without attracting unwanted attention. Mayo's reputation for reliability and his control over rural Sinaloa made him an ideal partner. This connection transformed Mayo's operation from a regional marijuana and opium business into something much larger. Suddenly, he had access to sophisticated smuggling routes, corrupt officials at the highest levels of government, and most importantly, the Colombian cocaine trade that was about to explode. But Mayo didn't just accept this opportunity passively. He negotiated his position carefully, ensuring that he maintained control over his territory while gaining access to the cartel's resources. This balance between independence and cooperation would become a hallmark of his entire career. Here's where Mayo's story gets really insane. In the late 1970s, Colombian cartels were looking for reliable Mexican partners to help them move cocaine into the United States. The Colombians had perfected the production, of high-quality cocaine and had established distribution networks in major American cities. They needed someone who controlled the Mexican side of the operation. The economics of cocaine were unlike anything the drug trade had seen before. While marijuana and heroin generated decent profits, cocaine offered margins that were almost unbelievable. A kilogram of cocaine that cost a few $1,000s to produce in Colombia could be sold for tens of thousands in the United States. Profit potential was enormous, but so were the risks. Mayo was perfectly positioned for this opportunity. He controlled rural landing strips where small planes could land undetected. He had safe corridors through the mountains that law enforcement couldn't monitor effectively. He had border routes that had been tested through years of marijuana and heroin trafficking. Most importantly, he had proven himself as someone who could move large quantities of product without getting caught. But here's what made Mayo different from other traffickers. He understood the economics. Instead of just taking flat payments for his services, he negotiated percentage-based deals with the Colombians. This meant that every successful shipment didn't just pay him a fee, it made him a partner in the profits. Let me break down the numbers for you, because this is where things get absolutely wild. A single cocaine shipment in the late 1970s could be worth millions of dollars. We're talking about planes carrying 500 to 1,000 kilograms of pure Colombian cocaine with street values that would make your head spin. A typical operation might work like this. A Colombian supplier would fly a plane loaded with cocaine to one of Mayo's remote airstrips in Sinaloa. Mayo's people would unload the plane, store the cocaine in secure facilities, and then transport it north toward the U.S. border using established smuggling routes. Once the cocaine reached American distributors, Mayo would receive his percentage of the profits. Mayo wasn't just facilitating one or two of these shipments, he was running multiple operations simultaneously. His network was so efficient that he could handle several major shipments per month. And remember, he was getting a percentage of each one, not just a flat fee. The scale of these operations was unprecedented. Mayo's organization was moving tons of cocaine every month, generating profits that dwarfed anything the Mexican drug trade had seen before. A single successful month could generate more revenue than most legitimate businesses made in an entire year. Industry analysts and DEA estimates suggest that by 1976, when Mayo was just 28 years old, his total assets had crossed the $1 billion mark. This wasn't just cash sitting in a bank account. This was a combination of liquid assets, real estate, legitimate businesses, and ongoing revenue streams that were generating millions every month. To put this in perspective, $1 billion in 1976 would be worth over $5 billion today. We're talking about a 28-year-old from rural Mexico who had built one of the most profitable criminal enterprises in the world, generating more revenue than many Fortune 500 companies. But Mayo's billion-dollar status wasn't just about the money he was making. It was about how he was managing and protecting that wealth. While other traffickers were spending their profits on mansions, cars, and parties, Mayo was reinvesting everything back into his business and building systems to protect his fortune. He established a sophisticated money laundering operation that moved cash through multiple countries and financial institutions. Mayo's organization had accounts in Swiss banks, Cayman Island institutions, and American financial centers. They used shell companies, fake identities, and complex financial instruments to clean drug money and make it appear legitimate. Mayo also began investing heavily in real estate during this period. He purchased ranches throughout Sinaloa and other Mexican states, not just as safe houses, but as legitimate investments that would appreciate over time. These properties served multiple purposes. They provided secure locations for storing drugs and conducting business. They generated rental income, and they gave Mayo a portfolio of assets that were difficult for authorities to trace or seize. The scale of his real estate investments was staggering. Mayo owned hundreds of properties by his late 20s, including working ranches, commercial buildings, residential developments, and undeveloped land. Some of these properties were purchased under his own name, while others were bought through shell companies or trusted associates. Mayo's approach to wealth management was sophisticated in ways that most criminals never achieved. He understood that having $1 billion in cash was useless if you couldn't spend it or if it could be easily seized by authorities. So he created a diversified portfolio of assets that was spread across multiple jurisdictions and protected through various legal structures. He also began investing in legitimate businesses during this period, not just as fronts for money laundering, but as genuine profit centers. Mayo understood that the drug trade was inherently unstable. Markets could change, law enforcement could crack down, rivals could emerge. Having legitimate income sources provided stability and protection that purely criminal enterprises couldn't offer. So how did Mayo achieve what other traffickers couldn't? The answer lies in his approach to business and his understanding of long-term strategy. Mayo treated drug trafficking like a legitimate business that required planning, investment, and systematic management. First, Mayo avoided the flashy lifestyle that got other traffickers killed or arrested. While his competitors were buying mansions, sports cars, and throwing lavish parties, Mayo dressed like a modest rancher and lived in simple accommodations. This wasn't just about staying under the radar. It was about reinvesting profits back into the business. Every dollar Mayo made went into expanding his operation. He bought ranches that served as safe houses and storage facilities. He invested in transportation fleets, trucks, boats, and planes that could move product efficiently. He purchased storage sites throughout Mexico where large shipments could be hidden safely. But the most important investment Mayo made was in protection. He didn't just pay off individual cops or officials. He built systematic corruption networks. Entire police departments, military units, and government offices were on his payroll. This wasn't just about avoiding arrests. It was about creating a business environment where his operations could function smoothly. Mayo's corruption network was sophisticated and strategic. He identified key officials at every level of government and law enforcement, from local police chiefs to federal prosecutors. He studied their financial situations, personal problems, and career ambitions, then crafted offers that were difficult to refuse. For some officials, Mayo offered straight cash payments in exchange for protection. For others, he provided business opportunities, investments, or other financial benefits that appeared legitimate. He also offered non-financial incentives, information about rival criminals, assistance with difficult cases, or help with personal problems. This systematic approach to corruption created a network of protection that was incredibly difficult for honest officials to penetrate. Even if one or two officials couldn't be bought, Mayo had enough people on his payroll to ensure that his operations were protected and that he received advance warning of any law enforcement activities. Mayo also understood the importance of community support. He invested heavily in the rural areas where he operated, providing jobs, infrastructure, and economic opportunities that didn't exist before. Entire towns became dependent on his operations, creating a network of people who had every reason to protect him and his business. This community investment wasn't just about buying loyalty. It was about creating economic ecosystems that made Mayo's presence beneficial rather than threatening. He funded schools, medical clinics, and infrastructure projects. He provided steady employment to thousands of people. He became a patron and benefactor to communities that had been ignored by the government. By his late 20s, Mayo had created something unprecedented in the drug trafficking world, a fully integrated criminal enterprise that operated like a legitimate multinational corporation. His organization had departments for transportation, security, finance, communications, and human resources. It had standard operating procedures, training programs, and performance metrics. He established legitimate businesses that served as fronts for money laundering. We're talking about dairy companies, cattle ranches, trucking firms, and real estate developments. These weren't just covers. They were profitable businesses in their own right that helped clean his drug money and provided additional revenue streams. Mayo's dairy company, for example, became one of the most popular milk brands in Sinaloa. The company, Nueva Industria de Ganaderos de Culiacán, produced high-quality pasteurized milk and cheese under the Santa Monica brand. The products were widely available throughout the region and even exported to the United States. Local families bought Mayo's milk for their children without knowing they were supporting one of Mexico's biggest drug lords. His construction company took on major civil engineering projects throughout Sinaloa and neighboring states. The company built roads, bridges, and public buildings, contributing to the region's infrastructure while providing perfect cover for moving money and materials. Construction projects also provided employment for hundreds of people and gave Mayo additional influence with local governments. Mayo's ranches produced high-quality cattle that were sold throughout Mexico and exported to the United States. These operations employed hundreds of cowboys, veterinarians, and support staff. They generated millions of dollars in legitimate revenue while providing perfect cover for drug storage and transportation activities. This diversification strategy served multiple purposes. It laundered drug money through legitimate channels, created additional income sources, and further embedded Mayo into the legal economy in ways that made him difficult to target without disrupting entire communities. Mayo also pioneered what would later become standard practice in the cartel world, treating trafficking like a logistics business rather than a criminal enterprise. He invested in technology, communication systems, and transportation infrastructure that allowed him to move products more efficiently than anyone else. His organization developed sophisticated methods for avoiding detection. They used coded communications, rotated routes regularly, and maintained detailed intelligence networks that could warn them about law enforcement activities. This wasn't just criminal activity, it was advanced business operations applied to an illegal industry. Mayo's communication systems were particularly advanced for the time. His organization used encrypted radio networks, coded telephone systems, and even early computer technology to coordinate operations across vast distances. This allowed him to manage multiple simultaneous operations while maintaining security and avoiding detection. What really set Mayo apart was his understanding that in the drug business, your biggest asset isn't your product or your money, it's your freedom. And protecting that freedom required building the most sophisticated protection network in Mexico. Mayo didn't just pay bribes, he created systematic corruption that reached every level of government and law enforcement. Local police, state officials, federal agents, military commanders, everyone had a financial incentive to ensure Mayo's operations continued uninterrupted. But this wasn't just about money. Mayo understood that sustainable corruption required mutual benefit. He provided information about rival traffickers to law enforcement, helping them make arrests that boosted their careers while eliminating his competition. He funded community projects that made local officials look good to their constituents. Mayo's intelligence network was perhaps his most valuable asset. His organization had informants throughout law enforcement agencies, government offices, and rival criminal groups. This intelligence network allowed him to stay ahead of investigations, avoid law enforcement operations, and eliminate threats before they became serious problems. The sophistication of this intelligence operation was remarkable. Mayo's people monitored police radio frequencies, tracked the movements of key officials, and maintained detailed files on everyone who might pose a threat to his operations. They knew which judges were honest, which prosecutors could be bought, and which law enforcement agencies were planning operations against drug traffickers. This protection network was so effective that Mayo operated for decades without ever being seriously threatened by law enforcement. While other major traffickers were being arrested or killed, Mayo's operations continued to expand and generate enormous profits. When you look at Mayo's rise to billionaire status by age 28, you're not just seeing a criminal success story, you're seeing a masterclass in entrepreneurship applied to the most dangerous industry on earth. His ability to identify opportunities, build systems, and create sustainable competitive advantages would be impressive in any business context. Mayo's success came from treating drug trafficking like a legitimate business that required long-term planning, systematic investment, and professional management. While other traffickers focused on quick profits and immediate gratification, Mayo built sustainable systems that could generate wealth for decades. The fact that he achieved this level of success while maintaining his freedom for decades shows just how effective his strategies were. Mayo understood that true wealth isn't just about making money, it's about building systems that can generate and protect that money over time. His story proves that even in the criminal world, the biggest winners aren't necessarily the most violent or the most ruthless. They're the ones who think like business people and build accordingly. Mayo's billion-dollar empire at 28 was just the beginning of a criminal career that would span over 5 decades and generate wealth that most legitimate business people could never imagine. That's the real lesson from Mayo's story. Whether you're building a legal business or running a criminal enterprise, the principles of success remain the same. Understand your market, build sustainable systems, invest in protection and relationships, and always think long-term. Mayo just happened to apply these principles to moving drugs instead of selling widgets, and the results speak for themselves. His billion-dollar achievement at 28 wasn't luck or circumstance. It was the result of strategic thinking, systematic execution, and an understanding of business principles that most people never master. That's what made El Mayo one of the most successful criminals in history, and why his story continues to fascinate people decades later.